A chicken whose head has been cut off still runs around the yard for a while, flapping its wings. Something similar is happening with Old Lady Europe. We'll send troops to the line dividing Russia and Ukraine, but there are no troops. We'll pay for the weapons that America will make for Ukraine and supply, and we'll buy them and give Ukraine the money. No, we'll stand as a united front, but there is no unity. We will help you get back on your feet if you join the European Union. And they sign an agreement that the newcomers won't compete with France or Germany, and they will have to. They basically have to dismantle and sell off their factories and destroy their fishing fleet if they have one. We will give you handouts. We won't let foreign goods into your country, so you can only buy our products. We won't allow unprofitable industries to shut down and lay people off. We will subsidize them. France is in a political typhoon. The National Assembly, yes, that's the French Parliament. They voted to remove the Prime Minister and the government, mainly for wasting funds on unnecessary taxes. So taxpayers, for example, don't want to give money for the emigration of hundreds of thousands, even millions, who are already coming from other countries, from Africa, from the Middle East, and so on. All sorts of idiotic initiatives about world travel, about global warming, which supposedly a person can stop. A program supporting people transitioning to a different gender. In other words, money is being spent as if absolutely drunk sailors have just come ashore. In England, people went on strike because of the influx of migrants into the country and citizens losing their jobs. To be continued. The positive consequences are the arrests of illegal immigrants who supported Hamas and other terrorist organizations, and the decision to settle new arrivals, meaning newcomers, on military bases instead of in city centers. In Italy, Greece, Spain, even Serbia, they are experiencing the same crisis for the same reasons. Europe in September of 25 was and is engulfed. So September has just arrived, and it is already engulfed by a wave of strikes, transport barricades, and political protests. The majority of the population demands an end to wasting resources on immigrants and foreign wars. Perhaps this is the people's reaction to the fact that Europe now has to finance American weapons going to Ukraine. To be continued. Ignoring the demands of the voters, the Prime Minister of England, Keir Starmer, came and stated that he would continue to do exactly the same things. He received Abbas, the Palestinian Authority head.
To be continued.
On September 6, 17, boats with 1,097 migrants arrived in England. Narkomlena Napoina met and accommodated them. They received money and were asked where they wanted to buy a ticket to, where in England they would like to go. This was after Keir swore that he would no longer accept illegal immigration. They went out for drinks and snacks. And here is their British Minister of Defense. Israel has the right to defend itself and eliminate terrorists, but it does not have the right to shoot indiscriminately. So, actually, how are they supposed to eliminate them then? But he didn't say how. They're Jews. Let them come up with something, like poisoning themselves or all drowning in the sea, and then there won't be any more conflict.
This is an acknowledgement that we recognize Israel's right to defend itself, but a new military offensive in Gaza is simply wrong. Artificial famine in Gaza, which requires a flow of aid. along with the release of all remaining hostages, and that's exactly what we're working on, eh?
Why haven't the hostages been released yet? You're working on it, aren't you? It's not visible, right? It's somewhere deep inside, and we're supposed to believe in it and not shoot at the poor or rich Arabs. The French Ministry of Defense sent a letter to hospitals to prepare for mass military casualties around March 2026. I repeat, the Ministry of Health in France sent a letter to hospitals to prepare for mass military casualties. Casualties meaning, well, injuries, scratches, concussions, and so on around March 2026. Are you expecting some kind of war at that time? After all, they are all expecting it. So that's what they said. Around March, the doctors reported what it means. It implies like thousands of wounded. So rumors immediately started in the foreign ministry that Merkel wants to provoke Putin. Macron's words, I mean not Merkel, Macron, what am I even saying, wants to provoke Putin. Macron's words were different from this letter. He said, we want to prevent confrontation and war. And at the same time, his minister sends out a letter. Expect several thousand wounded. Well, okay. But he did add that Putin is an ogre. Remember what an ogre is, right? In order to keep existing, he has to kill and devour his victims. There won't be a war, yet we're telling hospitals to prepare for one in March. The coalition of the willing, or the coalition of volunteers, you could translate it that way, came together to show Russia their united front.
Edited today at... In Paris, the coalition of the willing, a group of Western allies, met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. French President Emmanuel Macron stated that 26 countries have pledged to provide security guarantees to Ukraine after the war if a ceasefire is reached. Listen.
In the coming days, we are going to finalize American support for these security guarantees. The United States, as I mentioned, has been involved at every stage of the process. Well, the White House says that Mr.
Zelensky and Mr. Trump have previously spoken on the phone. Both American and European officials are raising the idea of secondary sanctions, which of course will affect countries trading with Russia. Trump says that Europe should stop buying Russian oil and put economic pressure on China. EEM. Lisabel will share more about Europe's post-war plan from Paris. President Macron says that there are now 26 countries in the coalition of the willing which have committed to being present in Ukraine after the agreement. This happened after a meeting of the coalition members, some of whom participated via video conference, while others were present here in Paris this Thursday, and after a long phone conversation between the group and President Trump. Very few details have emerged about what exactly the American guarantees, the so-called backstop, will look like. We understand from the French president that these details will be finalized in the coming days. The main point when he spoke with the Ukrainian president who requested the meeting is that more countries are ready to promise their presence in Ukraine once a peace agreement is reached. At the moment, of course, there is no sense that the trilateral meeting President Trump hoped to organize with the Ukrainian and Russian presidents is close to happening. President Macron is once again urging the Russian president to try to come to the negotiating table. These security guarantees, which are mainly being considered by this European group, are really intended to show that they are serious about the technical issues they have now discussed in detail, to ensure that Ukraine can maintain its stability and independence.
But there's a simple problem. Who will pay? Some sources claim 83,000 soldiers are needed to secure this line, while others say at least 120,000 are required. What are soldiers standing on alert between the Ukrainian and Russian forces? To be continued. It seems that Europe, which will send soldiers, give money, and buy weapons from the United States to continue or end the war, actually has no money at all. Sorry for laughing. The United States also agreed to provide intelligence data, and some claim that there will be air cover for the peacekeeping forces. I suspect that in America they know that Europe won't be able to deploy any peacekeeping forces.
With us? We have Nick Payton-Walsh with us. Nick, 26 countries have agreed to these security guarantees. How will this look in practice, and what role can the United States play here? What kind?
We know very little about this. We know the psychological impact of European countries like France and likely the United Kingdom announcing plans to deploy troops in Ukraine. Russia has already rejected this as a principle, but for Ukrainians, these are huge European military powers saying that they will support them in a physical way. American involvement here. Trump has assured everyone that he is not going to send American troops on the ground, but they will provide what the Europeans call backup. This covers military personnel, logistics, intelligence, ground support, and air power. So, if any peace agreement is reached, which, as we can see, is still far off, some kind of freeze could happen along the front line. And the Americans could potentially use their significant air power, which could easily challenge Russian air superiority along the front line right now, to essentially freeze the skies to stop the nightly drone and missile attacks. The media has talked about the possibility of creating a demilitarized zone in Donbass along the front line, where the armies would be 30 to 40 kilometers apart from each other. Essentially, that's the distance that drones can currently cover. Zelensky rejected this, saying Ukraine is being told to retreat and give Russia an advantage. Now, drones are creating this so-called gray zone, a type of demilitarized area. So we don't know much about the details, but it seems that you will almost certainly see European troops in the capital, probably in a major city like Dnipro. Here they talk about protecting the ports, which would mean Odessa as well. But will you see them on the front line? Almost certainly not. They'll be there to support Ukrainians psychologically. Saying that Europe and NATO support you but aren't actually fighting.
Has Europe finally, after almost 75 years of dormancy, returned to the world stage with renewed strength? Let's remember what exactly made Europe great.
Why did Europeans conquer the world? 1,000 years ago, they were completely powerless, but by 1914, they had taken over 84% of the planet. Why did they rise to the top, and not the Chinese, Japanese, Ottomans, or South Asians who for centuries were much more advanced? This question has puzzled historians and social scientists, but so far they have not come up with a satisfactory answer. And this question matters because Europe's power determined who had colonies, who engaged in the slave trade, who became wealthy, and who remained in poverty. Jared Diamond suggested that Europe's dominance is explained by industrialization and diseases. Europeans were the first to start industrialization, but they had already conquered 35% before they began industrializing. So what contributed to Europe's success? The leadership they took in developing technology, weapons, and armed ships was critical because it allowed them to conquer the world. But all the other major civilizations in Asia used the same technology and fought with weapons just as often as the Europeans. Therefore, the leadership of the Europeans cannot be explained by the fact that they fought more wars than other leaders of Eurasia. Political incentives drove them not only to wage wars, but also to spend huge amounts on it. Yes, they built palaces too, but even Versailles cost Louis XIV only about 2% of his tax revenues. Everything else went to waging wars. Leaders in other parts of Eurasia faced completely different incentives, and they could not spend as much on war. And that's why they didn't develop gunpowder technology as far as the Europeans did. And why did they face such different political incentives? The answer comes from the economic model, political incentives, and technological changes. This model highlighted the conditions under which gunpowder technology would improve. And these conditions existed in Western Europe all the time, from the very moment firearms appeared. This was not the case in other parts of Western Europe, and that's why Western Europeans advanced gunpowder technology further than anyone else. In East Asia, for example, Kitai was often the dominant power, and so its rivals did not dare to challenge it and force it to spend much on war. And that's why the Chinese ultimately did not advance gunpowder technology as far as the Europeans did. Now, why were the political incentives in Europe so different? The answer lies in the political history of Europe. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe experienced a kind of anarchy similar to what exists today in places like Afghanistan or Somalia, an anarchy that lasted for centuries. This anarchy did not allow a dominant power like China to emerge in Europe. It also ensured the division of Europe into hostile powers that fought and spent a lot on war. Now, things could have turned out differently. If, for example, the Mongols had not invaded China, then China might have been divided into hostile powers. And today, we might be asking why China conquered the world by 1914.
It's interesting, so the fact that Europe didn't unite like China and was constantly fighting within its own continent led to the development of technology to European countries becoming the best warriors, I don't know, so to speak, killers, conquerors in the world. But what happened? Why has Europe faded today? Why is it now a paper tiger full of memories, just like the long-gone Roman Empire? Why, what happened so quickly? Listen, 3 generations, everything is past.
For centuries, Europe was seen as a stable economic stronghold, hosting many of the world's richest and most developed nations. Germany's industry, France's social model, and Italy's heritage have influenced both Europe and global economic policy. But this stability and prosperity are starting to crack. Growth has stalled, the population is aging, productivity lags, and investments are drying up. Once seen as role models, these stagnating powers are now cautionary tales. Germany is rethinking its industry, Italy faces long-term stagnation, and France tries to balance social protection and competitiveness. We've reported these stories before, but together they show a deeper narrative. A continent faces decades-old challenges as 3 major economies struggle to reinvent themselves. This is the economic reality of Europe. Stagnation, fragility, and the slow erosion of the power it once took for granted.
And the gradual decline of its influence on the world. What happened? Why did powerful, dynamic Europe slow down? Because Europe mainly brought culture. Let's live in harmony, that's all. Everything will be amazing. I'll just explain that you had a tough childhood, and right away you'll understand everything, and we'll stop fighting and become friends and kiss each other passionately. The United States of America, as it happened, provided cover, so there was no need to develop the army or technology. The countries lived together and separately at the same time. Aggression was not encouraged among children in schools. When I say together or separately, I mean that on one hand it was the European Union, kind of a union. On the other hand, each country, so to speak, had its own prime minister, its own president, its own laws, its own rights, and so on. That is, it was much more fragmented than the states of the United States of America. Although in the states we also have, in each sort of union laws, the United States of America is much more homogeneous than Europe. In schools, children were taught not to respond to insults and violence. In other words, not to respond with violence, but to look for someone who would solve this problem for them. So children stopped being able to solve problems. Men were forbidden to show their own rules. Testosterone, yes. You had to be like women and not show any aggression at all. Children didn't learn to respond to any kind of violence, from verbal to physical. Practically, responding to aggression was forbidden by the cultural ideology of society. Men, in terms of strength, responsibility, and ambition, were probably ashamed just for being who they were, and then anything could follow. That is the very thing that once made us and them, them. Actually, I had nothing to do with it, but it made them conquerors, invaders, spreaders. Competition in schools was killed, explaining that the loser would also get a medal and a prize. Adults who produced well and a lot had part of their earnings taken away. That is, for a good and affordable product that you produced, you were punished. And for those who couldn't do things well and cheaply and couldn't earn a living, they were rewarded for it with subsidies and handouts, including debt forgiveness. So someone who was earning money now had to pay off their debts. Everything was done to make things easier for people, for Europeans. And in 3 generations, they turned them into spineless amoebas, capable only of selfishness and egocentrism. Well, they squeezed it out of the Europeans, not even squeezed out, like when you wring out laundry to dry it. Yeah, they wrung out their spirit. Research of the pioneer, the conqueror, and after those who still had that spirit of adventure, let's call it that, left for America, Israel, even other countries. The genes of the remaining Europeans degenerated, and Europe stopped having children, inventing, building, conquering, improving, and competing. And in order for their aging population to survive, they started bringing in foreigners. And they got millions of Black and Middle Eastern Muslims who are aggressive and crave everything they see around them. Why do these lazy Europeans have all this? Do I want the same or more? They do nothing while I work like crazy and I have nothing. They're ready to break the law. Easily to achieve, well, let's say a goal. They're full of energy and anger, and that anger comes from the city. It seems that this thing that comes from the city has disappeared in most European residents. Is it clear to us what's happening? What's happening is the decline of European civilization, the race, the white man, and Judeo-Christian culture. Only America remains. Maybe we have a chance with Trump. Israel, which can't even fight, because there's a constant war going on. They'll cut it off with a line. From the river to the sea, not a single Jew will remain. Whether you want to or not, you have to cultivate testosterone. I see the European Union splitting up, unless Russia takes it over from the inside first, or the Muslims do, also from the inside. And they'll send the Danes to pacify the Italians and the Germans to pacify the Czechs. But some countries might be able to withstand it. Individual countries, but I have no doubt that the old world has become a decrepit world. We will destroy this decrepit world to its foundation, and then... But it's not us. They themselves invited those who will destroy it into their own countries. You know what? Empires always collapse more and more and more. It's clear that this is also an empire. I understand there were many of them. There were French ones, Belgian ones, Dutch ones. The last one was British, but still, these are European empires, or one huge European empire. It has withered. The descendants of the conquistadors will stop having children. They'll probably turn gay, or they'll demonstratively cut off their genitals and flush them down the toilet. That kind of trend might appear. I'm just predicting it because they've already come up with everything else. Well, all right then. With these pleasant thoughts, I wish you a good day, or a good evening, or a good night, and until we meet again.